Joining us now on the Practical 365 podcast is Louis Mastelinck. Hi, Louis, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hi, Steve. Hi, Bastian.
So you are a Microsoft MVP. That's right, isn't it?
Correct.
In the house.
Microsoft MVP in Identity and Access Management and Cloud Security, whatever is in the title, of course. But
nice.
Yes. So you're quite a special one then. You're not just a generic Microsoft 365 one like myself.
I call myself the nerd who spends his lonely hours spending his time to figure stuff out, try stuff, and then I actually make videos about it, blog posts, and I try to share what I encounter. And I think that's why I was recognized to be an MVP. I share content. I share the things I struggle with.
That's it, isn't it? You start off with a problem, you can't find an answer, you share it on the internet because you've found other people's stuff helpful, and then people sometimes I'm happy with it, but a lot of the time people are like, this is great, you've really helped me out, and you get a lot from that, and it's nice to help people with stuff, and that's the thing about being an MVP. How do you become an MVP? People ask, but it is often, I like helping people, It's
figuring out, what am I struggling with? And am I going to be the only one who had that problem? If you just take the time to let me just make a couple of notes and then write it all out, then you'll probably be helping 1,000 people. And then, or maybe you're helping 10 people, but then you're achieving your goal of an MVP, and that's sharing knowledge and help people get a step further.
Well, yeah, the important part is sharing stuff that's useful and right and
correct,
actually helpful, rather than
helpful information. Yes. That's very important.
Yeah, not sudo rm fr / or something like that.
No translation of the Microsoft Docs or something. Just give me something that doesn't exist, something unique, and figure it out from there.
You could have just repeated exactly what Tony Redmond often says. And people have said to me before, someone who wrote about identity and stuff like that years ago, Neil Hobson, a former MVP, I remember him saying, don't rewrite TechNet. Nathan Winters as well, folks like that, they say, don't rewrite TechNet as it was, Microsoft Learn. Make sure you're adding value to it. And Tony said that on a call like literally a week ago. It's sort of the key thing. So Louis is clearly a proper MVP, but other than being a proper MVP, you've got a day job as well.
Correct. I'm a Belgian. I'm a security consultant, and I work at the Collective. So I'm mainly focused on everything which is Microsoft Defender related. So Entra ID, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Sentinel, the whole security stack of Microsoft should be part of my working belt, and I should be able to master them and talk customers through it, or do some complex architectures, or maybe just basically troubleshooting. And in those troubleshooting parts, you mainly get the most interesting use cases as an MVP as well.
And knowing your boss, Michael Van Horebeek, who's been on the show and wrote for Practical 365 as well, you're in smart company there then.
Correct. I have a good sparring partner. When I'm stuck on something, I can go to my boss and say, Michael, I have something I've never seen before. And that's that's something you should check out. Try it.
Do you ever try and stump him with exchange questions?
I'm no match for him. He's way out of my league. I know my place on Exchange, so.
Now, you do a lot of extracurricular stuff. You have workshops. You actually create sessions so people can learn. When you set these up, what is your goal and what can people actually gain from that?
Yeah, so one of my most popular or best workshop is about conditional access, and the main reason why I started that workshop is because out of my customer experience. I go to customers, I guide them, I help them with setting up a conditional access policy. And what happens is, once I do my job and I do my magic and this, oh great, this is perfect. And then suddenly something changes. They have some kind of impact, or a user has an issue. And then they have the reaction of, Louis, could you come back and fix it for me? But that is not my goal.
No. You want to educate the people so that they can do it themselves.
Correct. Yep.
So you're doing a workshop on this at Tech, but this is something that is not going to be the first outing of your workshop then.
It's going to be the second one. I've already done one in Dallas. This was my official first kickoff, and it was great. We had way too many people. Well, way too many. We had double the people that were expected. I think it were 50 plus people attending the session, and it was great. It was magic. People were asking questions. People left the meeting, the workshop after, saying wow, I got the new next best thing that I want to test. And they really went hands-on.
Yeah.
And that is also the goal of my workshop. My workshop is there is theory, and we have to understand the fundamentals of conditional access and how to authenticate. But we also do exercises, lab environments, which bring you, and these exercises are designed to give you that aha moment, the moment you realize, oh, wait, this is how it works. This is how conditional access works. And this is how this specific setting works. Because if I configure it like that, that won't work anymore. It's really designed to break your head or to get that logic right in your head.
So anyone with a bit of background can come to this session and actually gain something that they can take home and implement in their environment.
Yes, it's created to snowball you from basics to advanced. And sometimes there were people who were really advanced in conditional access said like, wait, I learned also basic stuff in your basics chapters, giving me the necessary insights to troubleshoot. And even if you ever like get overwhelmed, like later in the afternoon, we go to some more advanced exercises. My workshop is designed with a solution paper, meaning if you're not able to do the exercise and you just want to follow along and follow the explanation, you get the solution at the end of the workshop so you can try it yourself in your own test environment. So you can feel at ease if you're like, this was too much, my head is full. Well, at least you have the solution and you can try it later.
And conditional access, certainly, in my experience, seems like one of those things where people know, most of the time they know this, but it's quite, you can learn enough about it through a little bit of reading and playing around to be dangerous. You can quite easily learn enough to be dangerous. Do you come out of the workshop knowing enough to not be dangerous?
Well, yes.
Which is obviously subjective, but in theory.
There are some best practice, and rule number one, it's included as a step for each and every exercise, exclude your break glass account. It's step number one we always do. That's good. Even when you're creating just a basic policy and you say, I'm scoping it to one user, I'm never going out of scope. Well, I say always exclude, because as soon as there is a block statement at the end of your policy and you just do all users once and you press save, bam, it's over. You're done.
Over.
Now, I know in the session you can talk about, in the workshop, you're going to talk about moving away from per user MFA.
Correct.
And certainly that's something that I've seen customers use when they've not the licensing for conditional access. But also over the years, I switched it on some years ago in my tenant for family members that I've given accounts to, so I could just approach them one by one and not add them to policies, and didn't want to overcomplicate it. And found it reasonably, it's an easy thing to use and manage. But obviously, in my scenario, I don't manage their machines; it's their phones and things like that. So it's not something I would expect to see people using quite so much in an enterprise customer or somewhere with managed desktops, for example. I've had customers that have bought CA because it wasn't good enough. But you must see a lot more than I do then in the field.
Mainly, most of my customers are already on the conditional access stack, so they moved already away from per user MFA because it's not scalable and it doesn't have really the context of authenticating. So they feel like, wait, there's way much more potential in conditional access. But they're like, but how do we get this potential, this context, the fact that I can use a compliant device, that I can use IP locations in some scenarios, or I can block certain countries, or I can say, like, for a browser, I'm going to allow this, but not for an application. They're like, yes, there's so much potential, and they see that, so that's why they move away from per user MFA, but they're like, I'm afraid to do this and implement this the correct way.
Yeah. And I've also seen almost as if it's like an equivalent in a way, I suppose, to per user MFA in one respect, which is not secure defaults, but recommended policies in conditional access.
There were two types of recommended, like you have the Microsoft recommendation or the Microsoft managed policies. Those are the policies who suddenly appear in your conditional access rules, and they'll be like, hey, I'm here currently in audit mode, and then after a couple of days, take 30 days, they should enable them. Those are those. And you also have the Microsoft templates.
Yeah.
They're good. They're great. They're great for your fundamentals and your basic stuff. Even if you look in the templates, there's some more advanced stuff in there as well to make, for example, make sure that your admins have specific policies and such. Perfect foundations to get started and to get the inspiration.
But if you have this foundation, so you have the Microsoft best practices, and many organizations will say, listen, we want to have Microsoft best practices in place, but From your perspective and with your experience, is there actually a benefit of potentially designing, creating your own?
Yes, mainly first and for all is if you're going to design it yourself, there is no 100% match of conditional access policies. Every policy needs to be tweaked. Even I have developed some kind of baseline, but that baseline is a match for 80 to 90% of the company's use cases.
Yeah.
And that baseline is designed to achieve two things: safety and usability. And I always say, like, authentication shouldn't be an issue for an end user. It should be something very easy. And using conditional access, we can achieve that. Doing this with a template, you're not going to be able to give that flexibility or that assurance that something is going to be very pleasant for my end user. I don't want to do MFA by MFA or spam them. I want to make sure that I have the proper controls. And with these templates, well, you'll be sure that everything is okay, but are you doing it on, well, not by spamming them to death or being very in control? And that control part is also mostly the reason my customers don't touch about these templates. It's because they don't have the feeling that they know and understand the policy. It's a different as you go click, click.
Our customers know that they can create a lot of damage, especially if they do the wrong thing and then deploy it out to the entire organization. What would you say would be the first steps of actually designing your own?
I always start with my admins. I start with my administrators, and first of all, I look in Entra ID and I say, who has roles assigned? Who has an actively assigned? And the first thing I say, like, everybody who has an active assigned role, you either get an admin account, because you have to have a dedicated admin account. So I can specifically target your admin accounts to be more strict. If you have, let's say, your daily to daily user account, and you have a license to that account, I'm saying, but then you're an admin to me. And then you're going to sign each and every time. And I'm going to make sure you're signed out every 8 hours, for example. And then they get the feeling like, oh, okay. And get that IT team onboarded.
And sure, I suppose the most vulnerable area in security if they're not using MFA for admin accounts. And we have had Alex Weiner on the podcast in the past giving us some of the statistics, which is, shockingly high on accounts where the admins don't have MFA on. And to be fair, I don't know whether they're putting break glass accounts into those stats or not, but it's still higher than you'd expect.
And even now, break glass accounts should have MFA, for example, because Microsoft is pushing us. Like recently, they said, like, if you're going to access one of the administrator portals, portal.azure.com, security.microsoft.com, Intune portal, we are going to enforce MFA for you, regardless of any conditional access policy. It's going to be a layer on top of it. So this should be a no-brainer for us. If you don't have it, this shouldn't be an issue for any of us IT people, that Microsoft is giving us these requirements.
And across the Azure portals, Microsoft 365, admins will see these prompts saying that you must enable this. Basically, you've got to count down until it must be enabled anyway, right? So it's not a surprise. But then you've got that choice of, well, shall we do it the right way? And you'll say, well, this is a great opportunity then to get some decent conditional access policies that properly protect your the accounts that have the most access to do the most damage.
Correct. And it starts with the admins, but then you go down. Then I start with C-levels, then I start with regular end users, and you can do the scope. Like in the beginning, you want to do the scoped in groups, but eventually you want to have a policy having all users, all applications, a catch-all mechanism.
And this is somewhat different then, because it's the same theory, right? You're looking at the risk and then make a decision based on that. But with, say, a migration, if you're migrating a mailbox, for example, then the CEO's mailbox is probably not the best one to do first, because it might be over 100 gig and take more long, be harder to migrate, and have all sorts of problems associated with it. Lots of people that have got particular access to cover for them. All the problems might well exist in that microcosm. Whereas with this, you're, rather than saying, well, that the risk of affecting them by doing them first is high, you're saying the risk is that those are the people at top of the list to compromise, right?
Correct. And I do that for two reasons. They're my top priority to protect, but also I always believe in eat your own dog food or drink your own champagne. If I can convince these people, if I can convince them that this is the sweet spot of multi-factor authentication or basically of authenticating, and I have those people behind me saying like, this is the way we need to go. If I later end up with discussions in the environment with the customer in other departments, I have him backing me up.
And that makes a massive difference for these kind of security initiatives. And you don't see it often at customers. But, I've been surprised at some big, large, well-known organizations where went and sat down with their architecture team to lunch, and the CEOs come sat at the table wanting to know about what's back then AIP, bought into these initiatives. And those folk had done a fantastic job. And this was a big organization that works with governments all over the world, but done a fantastic job of getting the execs board all on board with these initiatives, and having the CEO show some genuine interest in protecting the organization and seeing these cyber threats as real. In an organization that works with governments, there's a lot riding on it, but these threats apply elsewhere, right?
Correct. Totally. The more you have the people invested and knowing what to do, the more benefits you'll have. And that's why I start with those IT people, C-levels. Of course, you have to pick the adventurous one. Like if you're going into a scenario of Passkeys or something, you don't have to do it with somebody who's mainly struggles with just the basic. You have to find the people who are a match and let them convince the organization.
This isn't using them as what we say, at least using them as guinea pigs, using them as people you're testing with. You're getting it right for the CEO.
Correct.
They're top of your list to do, but you're going to get it right before you go ahead, right?
Yeah, I do my validation, because also these C-levels often also are the people who have the most exceptions. Let me say,
yes,
you're only going to allow your application to sync from a managed device. Those C-levels are often the exception on that part.
Yes, they have multiple devices which aren't business confirmed.
So now I can play sort of the devil's advocate, because I remember, some large financial services customers, they had to make exceptions because the execs were board members across multiple companies in similar industries. And in tune, SDK, wouldn't allow that, right?
Okay.
So which seems one reasonable exception for the company that you're just a executive board member for rather than the CEO of. I'm not going to get fired over an exception that the CEO wants, or the owner of the company says, well, I like using this phone. I do it my way. I like to use these apps. So it's my company. I can do what I want. In some places, let's imagine Elon Musk was the boss of the owner of the company. You'd be fired out that, and certainly some of our US listeners in, the laws where you can be basically fired for whatever reason, almost without cause. It's quite difficult to push back. And I've asked others sort of these questions before. The Microsoft folks often have some good answers. You're on the front line, right? People must ask you this every day.
Yeah. Mainly sometimes people pay me to be mad at. I get sometimes hired in to be the guy who they can point the finger to and say like, it's that guy who tells us to do it, and he has very good reasons to do so. And he's going to point out the risks to you, and he's going to put them on paper, and he's going to challenge you like, if you're doing this exception, well, these are your risks, and I'm going to give them to you on a paper and say like, Elon, sure, you're the boss, you're the owner, but these are the risks, and you can be mad at me, but I'm a guy who's being transparent and honest with you of these are the risks.
Yep.
And sometimes they click and say, okay, fine, I understand. Or we find the middle. We do an exception, but we do another policy to capture most of the risks. Or they overrule me, and then I'm like, okay, fine, but I know that I've educated you and tried to get you along of what's happening. I cannot convince everybody, of course.
Yeah.
So in these organizations, Steve.
It's the case of sometimes you work with an enterprise customer, they've read the book, they've read your book or whatever, they've been to your sessions, they've spent 2 years learning about it, and they get you in, and partly it's they've learned so much they realize they can't know everything. So it's almost, I suppose, it's like two peers getting together, and you understand their organization and they understand the stuff from you, but they want something that they can stand in front of and say, look, this behind me, this is the reasons for why. We've got this bit of paper from the expert consultant, but the reality is they've learned the same stuff as you,
I mean, Steve, it's like convincing your wife. You may say whatever you want, even if you're right. If somebody else says it, she's going to be like, he said it. He said
Yeah,
it
yeah.
that we should be doing. And you're like, but I said it also. But it isn't the same sometimes.
Exactly, yeah. It's
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? And that's the way of the world, isn't it? People often trust an external consultant who's coming in, partly because it's a fresh pair of eyes, isn't it? To look at the same problem again, and it's getting a seal of approval in a way for that plan. So one, get expensive consultants in to back up your views. So it's not just you saying everyone needs to use MFA, blah, blah, blah. Everyone needs to properly secure the device because these are the risks. I read about them in a book. You've got the consultant said, well, I've worked with all of your competitors. They're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, that one of your competitors was targeted just last week. That's the sort of stories that make the difference, isn't it?
It's the experience we bring along. It's the theory is one, and implementing and clicking is one thing. But knowing what the end results are going to be and what the impact is going to be and how you mitigate those risks is two. And sometimes I go to a new customer, I deploy my baseline, and I'm like, wait, this is a scenario that we should add to our baseline because this might be relevant for a lot of other customers.
Yeah. Now, many organizations are using or starting with MFA implementation just from an historic perspective, but of course, there are organizations that have been doing it. Now, from your perspective, and when you go to customers, you know, you're seeing everything. But what I'm like really interested in is how do you actually find the gaps when potential customers are already years into MFA and have a potential really messy, obstructed, obscure environment? How do you start?
Yeah.
What do you recommend to the customers?
Yeah, it's not easy. First of all, it's not easy. If there are like 30 conditional access policies in there and they'll all have this strange logic and naming convention, it's very hard. One of the first things I do is, do you know Merrill Fernando, one of the product managers of Entra ID of Microsoft?
We've had him on the podcast.
Voila. He has ID Power Tool toys. It's a way of documenting automated your conditional access. I mainly say like, document them as is. And for each conditional access policy, I write out what is this policy trying to achieve? In human language, one sentence. This policy allows me to sync my applications on a managed device. So I can read it in human language. And if that doesn't make sense, then I'm like, why does this policy work? Why does it work like that? Because it doesn't make any sense to me. That's the first thing I do. And then it starts with, okay, gaps. Which gaps do I have? Now, you can use a workbook in Entra ID, which allows you like to see applications which don't need to do MFA. And then you have to verify, okay, what is the use case? What is the scenario that this user doesn't need to do MFA? Oh, okay, it's because he's on a compliant device. Check. Okay, this scenario we have done. And you reevaluate a couple of sign-ins, but eventually, while you're understanding what the customer currently has, then I do the translation to my baseline. What conditional access policy compares to my scenario, but it is the initial part of figuring out what they have configured, and a really good naming convention does wonders. If you cannot...
So that's really where you want to start. When you come into an environment which over the years has already grown, kind of not implemented best practices, you would start with remediation of the naming conventions and actually standardize and centralize it. But then what is the next step?
The next step is then I've standardized it, I understand it. And then I'm saying like, okay, and then I start by removing their existing policies, because mainly customers say like, give us something that works. And I give them a stack of policies. Then I say like, oh, you already have this policy and this matches with my policy. I delete or put it in read-only mode. And then I rename it and I say like, this is your new policy, we know. And then I go through my list of my baselines and say like, if we go through the 20 policies, then we're 90% there. And then we'll be talking about the use cases you didn't cover yet. What did you do, for example, for your VPN? Hey, are we allowing your VPN only on managed devices? That's interesting because, or are you still allowing for unmanaged devices? Talk about the use case they didn't talk about, didn't design yet. Or are they using every feature at full? And you walk them through.
And, you know, what's a good way to try and find the gaps in this? Well, the last place I was working, we had a customer, and I got asked to join a call managed service customer. Had said the policies, I think they were managing, themselves internally. They said, we've got some contractors, right? And we've got policies that force them to go through Defender for Cloud, so the reverse proxies, so they can't download or copy and paste when they're in the browser. And these folk have found a clever workaround, so they think they can sync Outlook. We don't know how they can do it. There's not a policy that allows it. Now, if that was me and I'd seen this and realized this was happening and then looked at the policies, and like anybody, right, you can look at something and go, I can't see what's wrong here. I think they were added to an exception, it turned out, or something like that. But, how do you find those gaps? Because it's quite easy to have those glaring gaps with these kind of policies.
And sometimes it's not easy, to be honest. I'm going to give you another example I had. We had done the fact that, same scenario, we allowed users to sync their applications on their desktop. And we had one use case of a company in Turkey which didn't have managed devices. So we had to create an exception. Customer said like, hey, if they come from an IP range of our VPN, allow them to. Because those users are normally not clever enough to install their VPN on their own. Mm-hmm. You know what happened? A week later, everybody else installed the VPN on their private device because that allowed them to use the Outlook app and the Teams app on their private devices because, hey, you're taking that away. So they all started onboarding the VPN because then they could bypass everything.
Yeah.
And we discovered that by interacting with IT and following up on our logs and saying like, hey, wait a second, why is this person coming from a corporate IP address, which on a device that isn't managed? Why is that popping up? It's not easy. I'm saying like, it's not something like a basic checklist you can follow. It's verifying, is this scenario right? And what are the exceptions? And that's mostly important. If I do some kind of exception, like saying, I require compliancy unless you're coming from a managed IP, then you have to think like, but wait, what can I do to cover that exception? Even if you follow Meister, it's a tool also from the community. Yeah. They say for every exception, you should have a catch rule, a catch logic that minimizes the risks of your exception.
So auditing here is crucial. Actually,
Correct.
Once you start to implement the new policies, you should have mechanisms and controls in place that take care of, as you say, catching anomalies, especially for these policies that should disable everything.
Task number one, when we start, the first thing I do is go to Enter ID, look into diagnostics, and see if there is a log analytics workspace configured. Without that, I can't do my job because I don't have any data. You cannot do it directly from the portal. You need to use KQL to create your dashboards, to get insights and try the use cases. Verify what you try to achieve based on KQL.
Yeah. And is there one thing that I suppose can fill up when you're doing conditional access policies is that you're almost trying to build a dam out of sponge. You've got a big sponge thing, there's water coming through it, and I know this is like, I don't know why I'm thinking about that Dutch story about the boy and his finger in a dike, and it's just popping into my head. So I'm really sorry about the analogy, but there's not one point where, you can stick your finger in and stop it. It's not like, a firewall where it's denied to apply. Conditional access policies seem almost the other way around, right? Yeah. Is it about having a good set of comprehensive defaults rather than, one catch-all policy?
Well, there should be a policy saying like, I require MFA for every user. That's something you should be having a policy, all users, all applications, and then say like, I require MFA for. But then there are probably maybe exceptions that you want to apply to them, use cases. And I'm always saying like, conditional access implementations is an adventure. Yeah. You cannot achieve the full-blown baseline in 2 weeks. Either you're going to hurt yourself, either we're going to lose the confidence of everybody else in the company. You have to, if I use the same analogy, you have to plug the holes one by one and build up confidence. And sometimes you have to say like, we're not going to do this yet because we have to first do this, this, and this, and then tackle the other stuff.
So, again, on the partner side, when I was working there, security and compliance projects a lot of the time are not like migrations. Obviously, you move from a legacy product to this, then that can somewhat be the case. But in terms of implementing better features, it can seem like, or it can be approached often as an agile project where there's an MVP in that there's that baseline to get to of, as you said, like, right, MFA for everybody and build from there, because maybe you haven't got all your devices managed yet or rolled out Defender for endpoint.
Correct. Start with the basics and then start with where can we achieve the most benefit. And some organizations aren't ready for the high-end stuff, which is fine. But then it's like, we know you don't have nothing, you're not ready for compliance. But what is the next best thing? Oh, well, we can look if you're managing those devices. Do we know these devices? And the fact that we do not know the state, well, for now, the fact that I know that I manage that device and it's a known device, let's say that is currently for me enough. And let's assess next year on their Intune project is further, or they've renewed a lot of couple new devices, or a migration is complete. Let's assess then what's the next step for you guys.
And just finally though, FIDO keys. I know it's on your workshop. Bring one along if you've got one.
Yeah.
And obviously, Alex Weinert, I think, has talked to us about, the increasing support of like the mobile passkey. It's popping up in consumer applications
everywhere
now. What are your views on how this is going to impact the enterprise?
I say, and maybe, well, it's not wrong. It's maybe brave for me to say, but I believe passkeys are going to revolutionize the way we authenticate. I push all of my customers towards the Microsoft Authenticator, mainly. If they don't, I do not push them directly to the passkeys, but I do push them right now to the Authenticator. Why? Because the behavior of grabbing your phone and doing something is the same behavior as a passkey. The only thing that's different is I scan a QR code. Yeah. That's the only thing. But if I push as many as people getting used to the fact that I have to grab my phone, use that Authenticator app, then I can use the true power of Microsoft, and that is using the passkeys, because not that they're very different, but it's a way big of a difference on safety. It's phishing resistible, and that's where I want to go.
So this actually extends past the boundaries of the corporate environment. You're actually educating people as well to, in their private life, start using these passkeys?
Sometimes, if they're willing to. Although, to be honest, right now, passkeys are currently for those people who are brave enough to do so. I'm pushing this out to all of the IT people and to the C-levels currently. Many of the organizations are like, we're not ready yet to have that discussion for the big crowd of people, for everybody in the company. But passkeys are mainly right now being fed to everybody who's of high importance. And I'm trying to build up that confidence. Passkeys is also not perfect yet, isn't it? Their enrollment method has recently changed from the device currently now to their mobile device. So it's still work in progress, and it's also device-bound passkeys. Like, it's only on that device, but what if I have a new device? You see, we're not there yet, but we all see the potential of the next big thing.
So it's build the right behaviors from the end users, so it becomes something they do on autopilot in a way.
Correct.
But then you're going to give them tools that make it safer to do something that they're expecting to do, but it, as you say, might be a QR code instead of confirming a code on the screen.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I think that's good advice. Build behaviors in advance before you want to roll out the thing that's going to revolutionize or level up, the security in your organization, because you've solved the problem before the technology was ready in a way. So you're prepared to go to the state-of-the-art thing when it's ready to roll out.
I often have the discussion, like SMS, a text-based MFA. We all know it's insecure, but it has one big advantage. It is, well, I can just take my SIM card and just get a new device and I'm done, and I don't have to contact the end user. Fine, that's one of the reasons. But then I always say, like, wait, first of all, it's insecure, but that's mainly a risk that they want to take. But do we want this to be there? Because the authenticator has so much more potential. I can use number matching. I can use, this is not my request, raise this one as a risky sign-in. I can get the context of the authentication. There's so much more potential of getting those users on the authenticator app. Yeah. And we should do our best to get rid of that insecure way and push them to it.
Microsoft have recently moved to WhatsApp, and that's obviously, I can understand that there's some benefits to doing so, but I could, for example, grab one of my kids' phones, scan a QR code, and for quite some time, effectively have cloned the SIM by using the web app or the web WhatsApp app. This is almost more convenient in a way, in a bad way, in that I don't need my phone now if I was going to get one of those confirmation codes, because I do have a tenant where I've not went back in and done all those bits. I mean, what do you think of that move towards WhatsApp? Because there's ups and downs, right?
Maybe from user friendliness part to do so. To be honest, I haven't heard that much. I haven't even encountered myself that Microsoft sent me an MFA port via WhatsApp. I wouldn't
either. I mean, convenience is the death of security.
Yeah.
This isn't a case where I got scammed. But
you probably did. You're actually spamming.
So if you look here, this is the actual messages on the phone. That's the number that's sending these.
Okay.
And I'm obviously there. This is me signing in to the Quest tenant with my Steve normal account.
Okay.
So I've not, after changing my phone, re-registered the Authentication because I've been a little lazy, and I primarily use the account to sign in to the blog. Practical 365 blog is protected with the MFA, obviously. So, but these codes of obviously they're coming from the same number. Now, when I sign in, they are coming from WhatsApp from an official Microsoft business account. But there's not a lot of information that I've seen on the Microsoft blog saying that this is Kane. We've mentioned it on the podcast, so it is official. I've not just been scammed.
No, there might be some advantages based on the protocol they're using. Like SMS, they're saying like, well, it's an insecure protocol. Let's switch to another way of communicating, and that's fine. Yeah, it's encrypted. It's fine, but there are other risks, just like you said, Steve. Well, I can easily scan the QR code and have multiple devices, and am I always in control of those devices? Because for me, this is the single truth of source.
Yeah. To me, it seems almost like the more I think about it, the fact that you could easily get away with for a week or so at least before anyone noticed grabbing someone's phone, like you're in some sort of spy movie. And you grab the phone and you quickly link your device, run away, and most people wouldn't notice, or even clean up the old ones, right? And then you'd have ongoing access. Do that in the middle of the night where you think you're asleep, and so I'm a bit surprised by it in a way, because I can just dress as a cleaner, sneak into everybody's office and SIM clone it to heart's content.
I mean, go to somebody's computer, do Control-Shift-T, restore all tabs, and if they have a WhatsApp tab open there on web for WhatsApp, you can basically scroll through their messages back again.
I tell you, we should have got Paula when we had her on the podcast to explain to us how you would red team that scenario, because I'm talking about this as if I'd ever do it, like I wouldn't. But that she was talking about when Alfo did this. So if you're listening and haven't seen or listened to that podcast with Paula, it's definitely worth a listen. But so that's something new. Do you have customers who have said, right, what are the risks in switching SMS authentication off completely, even as a backup or phone authentication?
Yes. The thing is, mainly for SSPR scenario, so self-service password reset, you can go two flavors. You can say I require two methods of authentication, or I can require one authentication method. And I'll go through the thought process. So one authentication method would be Authenticator app. That would be one. The other one would be text-based. The other one would be security questions, or would be email. Those are 4 ways I would be able to do SSPR. Now, email, not going to do. I'm not going to trust your private email address to be a way of verifying, because I don't have any control of what's happening to your Gmail or Yahoo or whatever. No. So, out of the question. Security questions never point to be effective. I mean, either they always fill in the same word, or they don't know the answers anymore, or they can be reverse engineered. It's not something we like.
Yeah.
Then, text message. Well, here we come to the hard part. We don't want it. And what happens is, if we don't want it, then we're going to remove it. And then we're going to say SSPR is going to be only one method. And that is the hardest part to accept. Are we going to allow self-service password reset based on one multi-factor authentication method where I previously had 2, even though it was an insecure way of performing it, of performing your authentication? That is the hardest balance to keep.
I suppose it's not a multiple authentication method.
It's a single. It is not MFA.
Would your bank let you get into your account that way? And if they did, how would you feel about that? So it's a situation where, that there's there's downsides, but there's no reasonable, better alternative sometimes.
And the fact that you lose that second authentication method isn't supposed to be an issue because we suddenly have device compliance. We suddenly have conditional access, which can say, but wait, if you're going to do an SSPR, well, then first of all, you're going to make sure that you're in the country of where we have, for example, a building, an office, or I'm going to make sure that you're going to do this from a compliant device or a managed device at least.
Yeah.
Downsize the risk.
This is the beautiful thing about CA policies, that you could say, right, they're on a managed device, in a managed location. All these conditions are met. So actually, we are happy that they have satisfied not just 2, but maybe 3 conditions without the user even having to be prompted.
Correct. Suddenly we can have many conditions without interfering with the user, without having to do something. Just the fact that he has everything necessary is enough conditions for us to say, like, yes, this is what we want to achieve. More security, less impact for the end user, and just move on.
Cool. So make sure you know all those features, use them to your advantage. But some of the things we just talked about, like managed devices, that's a big project in itself. You've got to get there, right? But it's part of the case for, I suppose, doing that.
Correct. Although in the conditional access part, if you're going to work on conditional access, Intune and compliancy should be a separate project.
Mm-hmm.
Don't wait for your devices to become compliant in order to do something. Those are also a different kind of skill sets.
Yeah. Different projects, different skill sets. Don't wait for the other. But as you were saying earlier, it's like an agile project. You're doing one thing at a time. You're slowly sort of boiling the frog, as to use a terrible analogy that not everybody's going to get, but you're slowly making that change happen in little projects, step by step, so that you get those, as you said, get the basics right. And then as you finish one project over here, get more features, compliant devices, for example, that's going to enable you to up-level the security again in that place.
Yes.
Excellent.
Well, I'm so excited to actually see you at the Technical Experts Conference. It's going to be an exciting session. The things you talked about today, I so look forward to seeing you on the road and in the 3 cities in Europe.
I will. I'm happy, and I'll happily share the experience I have, things I love about conditional access. I love to share my stories and bring those insights along, because conditional access isn't hard. It's just a mindset and figuring out how it works, and then you're good to go. It's not hard. I always tell it to people, conditional access is not hard. It might sound complicated, but once you know how it works and how you can configure it, everybody can do it.
It sounds like there should be some sort of a t-shirt that's got a version of that embedded on it. Can have a conditional access mindset. You heard it here first anyway.
Yep.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. I'm sure our listeners have found this absolutely intriguing, because it's one of those things that's never done. Conditional access policies are crucial to the security of your organization. You need to make sure you keep your skills up to date. So if you're going along to the roadshow, they make sure that you head along to see Louis. So again, thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.